presentation, I'll start the sedient. Okay, that's it, recording. I see we have Councillor Allison, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Anderson. I'll come back for that. We have Councillor Bradley and Brogan, Councillor Brown, Councillor Buchanan, Councillor Burns, Councillor Callaghes, Councillor Callaghan, Councillor Campbell. Are you here, Councillor Campbell?
Yep, I'm here.
You're here. Councillor Carmichael, I see you're here. Councillor Chalmers, I see is here. Councillor Convery and Cooper. Councillor Corbett and Cowie. Councillor Craig. I see we have Councillor Devlin and Donnelly. And Councillor Dorman. Councillor Dryborough and Fagan. And Councillor Faulkner and Ferguson. Councillor Fulton. Councillor Gray and Greenshields, as well as Councillor Hamilton and Councillor Harrow, Councillor Holford, Councillor Horn, Councillor Horsham, Councillor Hose, Councillor Lennon, Councillor LeBlond, Councillor Lockhart, Councillor Logan and Councillor Loudon. We have Councillor Lowe, MacDonald and Councillor Marsh. Councillor McAdams is here too. We have the Provost here and Councillor McClymont, Councillor McCreary, Councillor McGavigan, Councillor McGeever, Councillor McGuigan is also here, Councillor Miller and Nealon, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nugent, Councillor Razak, Councillor Ross, Councillor Scott, Councillor Shearer, Councillor Stevenson. I don't see Councillor Thompson. Do we have Councillor Thompson?
Apologies, Susan.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Devlin. We have Councillor Walker, Councillor Wartaw, Councillor Wark, Councillor Watson and Councillor Wilson, and I'm just going to check whether Councillor Anderson has joined us.
Yeah, I have.
All right.
So apologies for being late, but my 15 minutes is different for everybody else's by looks at it.
Okay then, thanks Councillor Anderson. We also have a number of officers present, as well as the interpreters and the local democracy reporter. Thank you, and I'll now hand back to the Provost. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Item 1, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting, which are on pages 3 to 14 of your papers. Minutes of the meeting of South Lanarkshire Council held on September 2020 have been submitted for approval as a correct record.
I'll second that, Provost.
Thank you. Thank you. Item 3, minutes of special meetings. Minutes of the special meeting of South Lanarkshire Council held on the 16th of December 2020 submitted for approval as a correct record, pages 15 to 16 in your papers. Also, minutes of the special meeting of South Lanarkshire Council held on the 24th of February 2021 submitted for approval as a correct record. The copy has been circulated separately from your pack. I would move the minutes as a correct record.
I'll second that.
Thank you so much. Item 4, minutes of Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee of 21st of September 2020, pages 17 to 22. These minutes are submitted for information. Can I ask that members note the minutes, please? Thank you.
Agreed.
Item 5, minutes of the Risk Audit Scrutiny Committee of the 6th of September 2020, pages 23 to 26. The minutes of the special meeting are submitted for information. Can I ask that members note the minutes, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 6. Recommendations referred by the Executive Committee, Prudential Code and Indicators, Treasury Management Strategy and Annual Investment Strategy, pages 27 to 30. Can I now invite Paul Manning to speak to the report, please?
Thanks, Provost. It's a straightforward referral report. These are recommendations by the Executive Committee as outlined there. Obviously, the papers have already been dealt with through that forum, and in terms of recommendations, we're looking for approval of the Prudential Code indicators for 21-22 to 23-24, that the Treasury Management Strategy be approved, and that the annual investment strategy, which included the change detailed there, be approved as well. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments, please? Can I confirm that members approve the recommendations? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 7, amendment to membership of licensing committees, pages 31 to 32. Can I invite Geraldine McCann to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Provost. The report advises of a proposed change to the membership of the licensing committee in that Councillor Fulton be replaced with Councillor Loudon, and the council is asked to approve the recommendation. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. Can I confirm that members approve the recommendations? Are we agreed?
Agreed. Provost.
Councillor Craig, yours to speak?
Yes, if I could. The way that Geraldine read that was the wrong way around. It should be that Councillor Loudon's replaced by Alistair. I think that it's probably just said the wrong way around. Just to make that clear.
Thank you, Provost. I apologise for that error. Councillor Craig is correct. I did read it the wrong way round. It is that Councillor Fulton replaces Councillor Loudon as a member of the committee.
Thank you very much. Can I confirm, members, that we agree?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you so much. Item 8, notice of motion benefit, 33 and 34. A notice of motion to be received in terms of standing order number 19 on the 5th of January 2021. Can I invite Councillor Convery to speak to this notice of motion? I understand it's seconded by Councillor Fagan.
Thanks very much, Provost and colleagues. There's a slight change to the motion. The Chancellor had intimated it was going to cease the £20 on April of this year. That's now been extended to September of this year. So with that, Chair, the preamble basically sets the scene for why this motion is coming before my fellow councillors. We want to write to the Chancellor. It was good of him at the time to give the £20 to people who were on universal credit. This lockdown, if anything, has proved quite categorically to people the need to update the universal credit money, because when you look at people queuing up in food banks, you look at the volunteers, and it's mentioned repeatedly, quite rightly, in this council, the great work that volunteers do, the amount of people that are involved in giving out food parcels, it's an absolute scandal in this day and age. So I would ask my fellow councillors to support this motion, to write to the Chancellor, to write to Boris Johnson, and to make the £20 uplift for universal credit participants to be put on to their actual benefit, rather than an increase, and then once the pandemic finishes, the £20 getting taken away. These people's lives don't change when the pandemic finishes. I would say, as of January this year in South Lanarkshire Council, there are 29,758 of our fellow citizens who are on universal credit. Now, if the £20 was made permanent, that would be a cash injection to South Lanarkshire Council economy of £595,000. That would be spent by these people in their own locality, and that would be a major boost. And I've got to say, colleagues, before I finish, because it's self-explanatory, I think I don't need to rehearse it. Everybody knows the situation. I would just say this is not a political motion that's getting put forward. It's getting put forward by the leader and the deputy leader of the Labour group. But anybody could put this forward, because I think it is immoral, and I sincerely believe this. It's immoral in this day and age that people have got to make decisions whether they feed themselves or if they're lucky to be housed, to put on their heating. We live in the 5th richest country in the world, and I would ask all my colleagues, and from every political grouping, to get behind this motion. It's an easy, simple motion. There's nothing false about it. There's no hidden agenda here. It's basically to give people who are less fortunate than ourselves an uplift, which they quite rightly deserve. And in that, Provost, I'll move the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Convery. Councillor Fagan, I understand you're seconding this motion?
I am indeed, Provost. I've nothing to add to what Councillor Convery has said.
Okay, thank you. I'm in receipt of an amendment from Councillor Wilson, supported by Councillor Gray. Councillor Wilson, do you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Provost. I'd like to move an amendment in my name, which, if it hasn't already been, will be circulated by the clerks. And whilst I agree with everything that Councillor Convery said, making the uplift permanent and extending it to legacy benefits is the bare minimum that UK ministers should do to make up for the poverty-inducing austerity agenda. And we should also use the word increase lightly, because people out of work today are still £1,000 per year worse off compared to 2011. And even before the pandemic started, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty said that poverty in the UK was systematic and tragic. It's wrong to say, sorry, it's wrong that those on legacy benefits, who are mostly carers or sick or disabled people, have been excluded from this lifeline for almost a year. The Chancellor did delay the budget, which was welcomed the cliff edge in support by 6 months, but the cut must not happen at all at any time. With unemployment rising and 6 million people now claiming universal credit, it would be a devastating blow for the UK government to proceed with these cuts. It would push more than 500,000 people into poverty. And for UK ministers to live up to the "no one should be left behind" narrative, it would be ridiculous for them to do anything less than maintain it and extend it for good. Provost, universal credit is broken and it needs an urgent overhaul. We've seen it in this year's council housing budget, where millions of pounds of tenants' rents are set aside to mitigate its worst impacts. It needs transformed to provide the safety net that people deserve. That's why our amendment goes further than the motion and calls on the UK government to scrap the poverty-inducing policies such as the 5-week wait, the 2-child cap and the despicable rape clause. There are now 4.2 million children living in poverty across the UK, and hundreds of thousands of them, as Jerry said, are relying on food banks and struggling to pay essential bills. If the Chancellor committed to taking just these simple steps, imagine how many families could be lifted out of poverty and into a position where they're both able to keep a roof over their heads and feed their children. The UK must learn lessons from the mistakes and ensure that we've got a system fit for purpose to support people through any future crisis. It's not a benefit system we need, it's a social security system based on dignity and respect. Provost, an unprecedented emergency requires an unprecedented response, so I move the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The clerk has now posted Councillor Wilson's amendment onto the clipboard for information of members. I'll hear from Councillor McGeever, followed by Councillor Gray, please.
Councillor Gray needs a second.
Thank you, Provost. The Liberal Democrat group is certainly happy to support the motion. We agree entirely with its key points, and although we would always want the Council to act appropriately in choosing how it works with other organisations, we do want these important points to be made very clearly. I think every councillor over the past year has had an awful lot more contact from residents asking for our help because they're genuinely worried about getting by. And the assistance that's came from the Council, from the Scottish Government and the UK Government has all been essential. I think for those on universal credit, the £20 increase makes a massive difference. And I highly doubt that anyone could be said to be enjoying the money. I think they're just greatly relieved to have it. It is helping them make ends meet. Removing it would be a huge hit to the incomes of those who have the lowest incomes in this country. And that would be very difficult to justify even at the best of times when jobs are easily found. But we are not in those times. We're in a time when the hospitality and entertainment industries are all but closed, shops are severely curtailed, kids are unable to go to school. And I wonder exactly what jobs would we be expecting people to get if they're currently reliant on this money. The £20 uplift is helping struggling people get by. Removing it would be deeply unethical, and I think it's very right that this council say so. So for the Liberal Democrats, we are happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor McGeever. Councillor Gray, could I just confirm you're seconding Councillor Wilson's amendment?
Yes, I am, and I would just like to add a couple of things, if that's okay, Provost.
Of course.
Right, I'm happy to support Jerry and Joe's motion, but however, I don't believe it goes far enough. As well as my councillor duties, I've been a welfare rights officer for 18 years, and I've worked with the most vulnerable claimants, assisting them to claim and appeal the benefits they're entitled to. Universal credit has been a nightmare to implement, with so many people waiting weeks for a payment and having to take out expensive advances to be repaid, which further dilutes their ability to budget and pay for essentials. However, today I want to highlight the issues with disabled people, especially those under 25. Now, on legacy benefits, after the gruelling work capability assessment, under 25s were entitled to the same amount of benefit as over 25s. Under universal credit, this is dropped by £20 a week. Why? Because the standard allowance has dropped. Their needs haven't changed though. Add in the loss of the severe disability premium for disabled people, which is a benefit paid to those who live alone and also claim for personal independence payment. A young disabled person who lives alone, potentially in supported accommodation, are losing £40 a week, and the over 25s also £20 a week. Disabled people are not and should never be targeted in any cost-saving exercise. These are so many ways that disabled people have been targeted. Gandhi said, the measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. So therefore, I ask you to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Provost. When I first seen this motion, a saying came to mind: a day late and a dollar short. I don't think it's actually that accurate. We maybe go a week late and £20 short. When we look at what the UK government has done to support communities, businesses and people all throughout this pandemic, billions of pounds, more than any other peacetime more has been spent on these programmes than any other time in peacetime. We can also look at what's happening here in Scotland. Funding has been made available. £10 billion has come into Scotland, not all of it forwarded on to businesses and communities within Scotland, some of it being kept back for some reason. They also had the opportunity themselves to take on other social work payments if they desire. They have chosen not to. They have decided not to support the local people by doing their own thing. Why are we only looking at this with one eye? I think the UK government, they have identified that there was a need and gave the money. That was time limited, yes, but they then extended it. There was no cut and there was no proposal to be a cut. I think we need to have a much broader view on this and not just about the single payments here that we're talking about in this proposal, because there is going to be a great many people who are suffering and will continue to suffer because of COVID. And I think we then need to look at how we're going to be paying for this in the end as well. I think this is just the worst of people just playing politics. It's not an issue for Lanarkshire County Council, and I think we should find much better ways of supporting our communities and our people by using the powers that we have. In fact, I would, if it's competent, I would actually move that we actually just reject this motion completely.
Okay, Councillor Allison, I take it you don't want to put an amendment?
I'll come back, Provost, if I do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, thank you, Provost. So I was just following on from Alec, and I agree with what Alec said, and I don't want to labour the fact that I just think that throughout the pandemic, I think the Chancellor of the UK government has taken good decisive action to protect a lot of jobs across the country, as well as Scotland. He's went even further recently by further extending the furlough scheme and also providing an extra 1.2 billion for the Scottish budget, and also given that £20 per week uplift in the universal credit. I don't want to go on because labour the points Alex already made, but I support what he said already, so I'll leave it at that. Provost, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Gray, you want to come back?
Thank you, Provost. I certainly do. This is not plain politics. This is about vulnerable people, people I deal with every single day, who are basically have been victims of this pandemic. And even before then, when you have someone who is getting £100 a month taken off because of their advance, having to pay rent arrears because you've had to be the first, unable to feed themselves, this is not plain politics. This is about people. I'm sorry. I'm totally disgusted with these remarks.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Provost, if I get off. No, I'm absolutely with Alex and Richard in this one. You know, it's basic economics to me. I don't know how we can afford it as a country to do any more than has been done at the moment. The Chancellor's already struggling to balance the books and clearly isn't able to balance the books, you know, with the 1% rise to the NHS. Let's not go into that here. But the fact is very simple. We can't afford as a country to do it. I don't know how people in this council think we're going to raise the money to pay for some of this. It's just pie in the sky ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Convery, are you willing to accept the amended words from Councillor Wilson?
Yes, I am, Chair. Could I maybe, do you want me to sum up the now, or do you want me to do it later?
If you just give me a couple of minutes.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
In light of that, do you wish to put in an amendment?
Sorry?
Councillor Allison, in light of comments,
yes, would do. I've got my wording sorted out now. I think we should be writing to the Scottish Government, the UK Government, and congratulate them for the support that they have offered their communities and businesses throughout this pandemic and these unprecedented times.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a seconder for that amendment?
Yes, Provost, I'll second that. And just to add that I'm very glad that we don't live in an independent Scotland at the moment. I would have been a worse off position we're already in.
Thank you. Councillor McGuigan.
Thanks, Provost. Could I just correct a few statements that have been made? The money that's coming from Westminster is actually money which Scotland has already paid into the Westminster coffers through taxes and other funding streams. As far as I can make out, and I'm sorry, Richard, if we'd been in independent Scotland, and if we'd actually been independent from the time when we first got the chance to do so, then we would have been in a much stronger position financially. We only have to look across to Norway. And if you want to have an indication as to where we could have been, you might want to actually go into BBC Alaba and look at a programme which is actually on there called State of Happiness. That's showing how the Norwegians got to the situation where they are, with the dirty big funding coffers that they've been able to accumulate over 30 odd years. That's independence, Richard. That's looking after your people. I'm sorry, the Conservative Party in Westminster only look after their own friends and their own funders. That's all that's happening there. Oh, and by the way, if you want to actually think about taking away the money, why don't you actually go into the House of Lords and start stripping them away from their finances?
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Walker before going to Councillor Convery to sum up, please. Councillor Walker.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Provost. Just to say, I'm happy to support the motion and the amendment. Although there is a commitment to extend the furlough, it's only temporary. People cannot survive and be sustained without that additional £20 a week, given the events that are in the future in terms of some of the people losing jobs, redundancies, all the rest of it. It's absolutely vital that it's permanent. But I'm not totally without understanding of some of the other comments that have been made. I would maybe suggest Councillors Wilson and Gray have a look at the Auditor General's report in relation to the Scottish Government's record on poverty, on the NHS, on inequalities, and also in education. Unfortunately, it's not one to be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Can I ask Councillor Convery to sum up, please?
Thanks very much, Provost. And I'm going to start off, and I mean this sincerely. I'm very, very sad right now. I was putting forward a motion to try and help people who are in destitution. And it's like everything else in this council. And I think some of my colleagues have got to go away and have a real serious look at themselves. See, at the end of the day, I'm not in this, it's not a political motion. It's a motion to help my fellow human beings to get a wee step up. And I cannot abide the tit-tatting that come on there from my Conservative friends, my SNP friends. Let's stop playing politics with people. The folk that are on all these benefits are not interested in the point scoring with politicians. They're interested in action. And that is why I support Josh's amendment. Sad thing is, Josh, when you phoned me up during the week and you said you'd come back to me, you never did. We could all make political points. This is nothing. This is about people. I can remember when I was made redundant and blacklisted as a shop steward. My wife used to go to the shops with my 2 kids, and she was terrified in case she bought something and she didn't have enough money to pay for it. I don't live in that situation now, thankfully, but there's millions of fellow people in this country that do, and that's who we should be looking at. So I am quite happy to support the amended motion. I hope we put it forward. I would say to Alec and his colleagues, my friends, I wish you would support it, because it's no political. It would put nearly £600,000 into the economy of South Lanarkshire Council. And to me, that would be a good thing to see for the people that would receive the money and for the businesses within South Lanarkshire. And that note, Chair, I'll say no more, and thank the colleagues that do support the motion.
Thank you very much. Can I now pass to Susan to summarise where we are and take us to the vote, please?
Thank you, Provost. We had the motion proposed by Councillor Convery and seconded by Councillor Fagan, a copy of which is in page 33 of your papers. There was an amendment put forward, so the motion has now been amended. That has been circulated, and the basis of that was that April changes to October in the first line, and also that there's an extra insertion after legacy benefits. We also demand that the government end the 5-week wait, scrap the 2-child cap and match the game-changing Scottish child payment. We have an amendment by Councillor Allison, seconded by Councillor Nelson, and that amendment is to write to the UK government and congratulate them on their support offered to communities and businesses throughout the pandemic. Is that a fair interpretation, Councillor Allison?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Moving to the vote, I'll read out your name, and if you can please indicate whether you wish to vote for the motion as amended or the amendment. Councillor Allison?
Amendment.
Councillor Anderson?
Motion.
Councillor Bradley?
Motion.
Councillor Brogan?
Motion.
Councillor Brown?
Motion.
Councillor Buchanan?
Motion.
Councillor Burns?
Motion.
Councillor Callaghes?
Motion.
Councillor Callaghan?
Motion.
Councillor Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Carmichael?
Motion.
Councillor Chalmers?
Motion.
Councillor Convery?
Motion.
Councillor Cooper.
Motion.
Councillor Corbett.
Amendment.
Councillor Cowie.
Motion.
Councillor Craig.
Motion.
Councillor Devlin.
Motion. Sorry, Susan.
No, thanks, Councillor Devlin. Councillor Donnelly.
Motion.
Councillor Dorman.
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough.
Motion.
Councillor Fagan.
Motion.
Councillor Faulkner.
Motion.
Councillor Ferguson.
Motion.
Councillor Fulton.
Motion.
Councillor Gray.
Motion.
Councillor Greenshields.
Motion.
Councillor Hamilton.
Motion.
And I think perhaps Councillor Harrow's input something to the chat. Yeah, he's indicated he's voting for the amendment. Councillor Halford.
Amendment.
Councillor Horn.
Motion.
Councillor Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor Hose.
Amendment.
Councillor LeBlond.
Amendment.
Councillor Lennon.
Motion.
Councillor Lockhart.
Amendment.
Councillor Logan.
Motion.
Councillor Loudon.
Motion, please.
Councillor Lowe. Councillor Lowe. Just check if he's still there. I think you're in mute, Councillor Lowe.
That's what it is. Aye. Motion.
Motion, thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Motion.
Councillor Marsh.
Motion.
Councillor McAdams.
Motion.
Councillor Provis.
Motion.
Councillor McClymont.
Motion.
Councillor McCreary.
Amendment.
Councillor McGavigan.
Amendment.
Councillor McGeever.
Motion.
Councillor McGuigan.
Motion.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Motion.
Councillor Miller.
Motion.
Councillor Nayland.
Amendment.
Councillor Nelson.
Amendment.
Councillor Nugent.
Motion.
Councillor Razak.
Motion.
Councillor Ross.
Motion.
Councillor Scott.
Motion.
Councillor Shearer.
Motion.
Councillor Stevenson.
Motion.
Councillor Walker.
Motion.
Councillor Wardhaw.
Motion.
Councillor Wark.
Amendment.
Councillor Watson.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Okay, there was 50 members voted for the motion and 13 for the amendment. The motion is therefore declared carried.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Now we move on to item 9, notice of motion, cycle hire, page 35 to 36 in your papers. The notice of motion be received in terms of standing order number 19 on the 15th of February 2021. Can I invite Councillor Lennon to speak to the notice of motion and seconded by Councillor Fagan, is that correct?
Again, that is correct, Provost.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for allowing me time to speak on this. I will say I actually do regard this as a political motion because it's a motion that seeks to materially improve the lives and conditions of the people in South Lanarkshire. I don't want to get into the particulars of the previous debate, but I think that's what politics is about, and I don't think it's anything we should be ashamed of. that said, yeah, so this motion is primarily centred around the idea of creating a bike hire scheme in South Lanarkshire or extending the existing bike hire scheme in our neighbouring authority, Glasgow City, into South Lanarkshire. Cycling is an environmentally friendly way of travelling. It promotes a healthy lifestyle. It reduces congestion. All the drivers on the council in South Lanarkshire will also be reassured to hear. And it's also, by and large, more affordable than other modes of transport when taken in the long run. The reason that a lot of people don't cycle really is because it involves quite a bit of startup costs, and because it's got quite a lot of practical limitations in a lot of circumstances. You have to buy the bike, you have to have somewhere to lock it up securely. If you cycle somewhere, you need to plan to return by bike, and sometimes that's not practical. Maybe people want to cycle somewhere and then get a lift or get a bus or get a train back. These are all elements of cycling that are effectively addressed by having a bike share scheme, and that is really one of the things that's helped to enable bike share schemes to encourage cycling in places like London, most famously, but also in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, in Stirling, and indeed in other authorities all across the UK and all across the world. I think that specifically having a cycle share scheme is different to other forms of cycling infrastructure, because it actively allows people to basically try it once with very little friction and with very little in terms of upfront costs. The existing scheme in Glasgow has been very successful, and they've kind of continually added new stations, which is another advantage of it, in that it's modular, and it can be rolled out at greater scale and kind of scaled up or scaled down as demand kind of dictates. Yeah, but it's again, because it's modular, it's something that can adapt to the kind of the available technology or the kind of demand that different parts of the community or different parts of the authority can maintain. Indeed, I know that the leader of the council is an enthusiastic fan of e-bikes, and I believe that they were recently added to quite a few of the cycle hire schemes. And as someone who's attempted the folly of trying to cycle unaided from Rutherglen all the way up to East Kilbride, certainly the ability to hire an e-bike easily would have taken the edge off of that journey. So that's basically the crux of it. I think that having a bike share scheme specifically would be a great use of some of the active travel funding that we have available as a local authority. I think that it would encourage people to take up cycling. I think that if we particularly integrated with a scheme in a neighbouring authority, there'd be a huge kind of network effect, a huge benefit to kind of enabling cycle travel or cycle journeys between the two authorities with very little friction. I think it would encourage people to visit both like the commercial centres in South Lanarkshire. It would encourage people to commute in an active and sustainable way, but it would also help to bring visitors and tourists into other parts of South Lanarkshire along the great cycling infrastructure that we already have, like the Clyde cycle route, and potentially bring people on day trips through to New Lanark or to some of the other parts of the authority. Now, I'm broadly in favour of having amendments. I've got to say, I had a look at the amendment that was proposed by Councillor Loudon, and there are elements of it that I do support and that I do think are quite good. I was a bit unsure, so I used a bit of a wishy-washy phrase in my own motion when I said it would be brought forward to the appropriate committees, because I wasn't sure if it would be the Climate Change Committee or Community and Enterprise who would ultimately have responsibility for that. So I think having that kind of specificity, which is included in her amendment, is certainly an advantage. I'm not sure that I would be prepared to accept it in its current form, partly because I don't think that making this motion broadly about cycling it really is in keeping with the intent here. I think that really I was hoping to raise the specific issue of a specific kind of scheme that I think would be effective, and I'd like to see options about how that specific kind of scheme could be implemented in South Lanarkshire. And I think kind of more broad discussions about other forms of cycling or other forms of cycling infrastructure would kind of muddy the waters there. So I'm not sure I can support that amendment in its current form, because I do think that it would be good to have a discussion about this, about having a bike share scheme specifically, rather than kind of in the broad and kind of more nebulous sense of, because there's any number of other forms of cycling infrastructure that could exist, but I don't think any of them have the specific benefits that this kind of scheme would have. So thank you very much for your time. Yeah, and I'm eager to hear what other members of the council have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Lennon. Councillor Fagan, do you want to say anything in a second?
Provost, could I just bring a point of order? Sorry, I know people keep saying
sorry,
to have.
Sorry, who's speaking?
It's Richard, Councillor Nelson. I know people keep saying about people on mute, but I can hear somebody heavily breathing. So obviously everybody's not on mute, but I've got a hearing aid, and it's very distracting to try and pick up what other people are saying. So I'm sorry for jumping in, but it is quite off-putting to have that heavy breathing in my ear at this precise moment.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. A good point. Can everybody make sure if you're not speaking, you're on mute, please? Thank you. Councillor Fagan, you want to say something?
Yeah, very briefly, because I think Councillor Lennon has set out the purpose and the intent and the thinking behind the motion quite very well. I would point out that before this motion has been brought, it's been some time in the making. Actually, Councillor Lennon has been engaging with relevant officers and with others. I would also say that the way the motion has been drafted, I think there is a flexibility in it, and that's what he's alluded to just in his earlier remarks. I don't think anyone is proposing to say we have all the answers and we have a model ready to go. That is why what is being proposed is a feasibility study that would be reported back at a later date. I am nervous about anything that could be seen as watering down the motion, and I also would really just have to say, in terms of cycling, there's been a lot of expenditure on cycling in South Lanarkshire. We can see that all around us, and I don't think we've necessarily had the increase or the modal shift towards active travel that we would have expected or hoped for that followed that investment. So I think to be able to look at a different kind of scheme, and as I say, not being prescriptive about what it should be, but to look at a different kind of scheme, potentially something that could integrate with Glasgow, not necessarily something that would apply everywhere at once, but we explore the feasibility at a later date. I think it's putting a marker down to say this is something that South Lanarkshire wish to explore, and for that reason I would encourage people to support the motion that Councillor Lennon has put forward.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. I should say that I'm in a position of, as alluded to by Councillor Lennon, position of one amendment, but also from Councillor Loudon, but also in possession of another from Councillor Dryborough. Could I ask Councillor Loudon to speak first, please? Can you confirm who's seconding your motion?
Thanks, Provost. Councillor Craig will be seconding.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Provost. So the amendment should have been circulated to everybody, and I move it in my name. I'm going to briefly touch on the main points. I agree with much of what Councillor Lennon has said broadly. I do have to push back on the idea of this amendment watering down the motion, and I'll expand on that as I go through. This amendment seeks to strengthen the motion because what it's doing is grounding it more in the local context and in the context of work that's already been undertaken by the council. To touch on the point about this trying to expand the idea of a scheme into a broader idea by Councillor Lennon, I'm trying to gently suggest to him that actually some of this work has been done to look at the specifics of expanding the bike hire scheme, and I'm not sure if he's been aware of that from the comments that he's made or Councillor Fagan's made. So you'll see that our amendment asks for an update, and that's because the council already has completed a feasibility study on extending the bike hire scheme, which is currently in place in Glasgow, which was presented to the Cycling Partnership in 2018. Councillor Lennon had mentioned earlier he thought there would be little friction in doing so, and I don't want to labour this point too much because I think it will come out in future papers and discussions. What I will say just now is at that time a cautious approach was advised, and it was said that more research was needed before committing to any bike hire schemes for various practical and financial reasons. Also from officers' understanding, in 2019 it was asked at an SPT liaison meeting about the feasibility of extending the current Glasgow contract to adjacent authorities. And it was stated at that time there would be contractual and cost implications due to the existing contract that was in place, which would affect any neighbouring authorities and Glasgow as well, should that go ahead. So that's why our amendment has got a specific point about taking the current status of the Glasgow contract as a starting point. The motion as it stands, I do believe, is missing any recognition of the work which community organisations have been undertaking in this area, and missing consideration how their work can and should dovetail into anything which we're looking to take forward. So, for example, Bike Town, based in Rutherglen and Cambuslang, Blantyre Bikes Better, should be commended for their commitment to the promotion of cycling and its benefits to health and well-being. The provision of low and no-cost bicycles to residents, environmentally friendly schemes, recycling, refurbishment, repair services, and so on. But their services go beyond just the provision of bikes to the provision of opportunities for individuals and families to build their cycling confidence, to connect with the wider community and make these small lifestyle changes that can build to longer lasting changes to travel patterns, which is what we ultimately all want to see. And they also offer the opportunity to try things out, to try different bikes and so on, which was one of the points that Councillor Lennon had suggested. But one size fits all in some of the bike hire schemes at the moment is not necessarily the place to start for people and to get them encouraged. But so given the commitment of these projects and similar projects actually across the council to encourage the uptake of cycling, I think it's important that we recognise the contribution made by these organisations, and we should be seeking to include their expertise. And all of this relates to one key point. If we want to encourage more people to take up cycling, we need to understand why they're not doing it just now. And we need to pay heed to the work that's been done in this area by these groups, by the council previously, before we narrow our path too much. So some of the comments earlier were about how this amendment was broadening the motion. I'm arguing the opposite. I think this motion is too narrow as a starting point. In some cases for people, it might be access to a bike, but it is more complicated than that, and we need to know more. It might be about feeling safe on the road. It might be knowledge of safe routes, paths and lanes. It might be about the layout, extent, the development of routes. And this is still all in flux. And my ward just now, Councillor Fulton and Councillor Brogan, there's an ongoing consultation going on about essentially joining up the East End via the refurbishment of a viaduct, which would connect with Westburn and then potentially connect with cycling routes beyond that. So that's just one example, and it's why that we're specifically asking in this amendment for an infrastructure update to come to committee as well. And the final point I'm going to touch on is community consultation. And I think that's absolutely key to the success of any projects which go forward. And I think it's very important that that's something that's recognised from the very beginning, which is why it should be added into this motion. Again, it's not about making it broader for the sake of it. There's an important context here of what's happened in the past. In the past, several communities, I'm sure Councillor Lennon will recognise this, being a Rutherglen councillor himself, several communities have expressed disappointment over what they saw as a lack of consultation over the provision of cycling infrastructure. And if we're talking about putting in a bike hire scheme, we are talking about providing infrastructure, because this will come along with physical hardware that will be sited on the streetscape. And people express a disappointment over the lack of consultation about how their streetscape might change. And we're talking about everything here from the large-scale project like the cycle path, which was running through Cambuslang and Rutherglen, how it intersects with the pavement, and then down to small and important examples that I know Councillor Fulton and Councillor Brogan will recognise from our ward about placing a shelter, and how actually, because the Community Council wouldn't have been asked, the first proposal would have been putting it in front of a notice board which the Community Council are about to erect. These things are important, and they're important because putting in new hardware affects not only cyclists, drivers, but pedestrians as well. And I'm sure other councillors will have similar experiences from their own wards. So that's why we're asking in this amendment as well to make sure that officers provide, as part of their proposals, an indication of how consultation work might be included in that going forward with the wider community. Sorry, that's a not very brief, as it turns out, explanation of the specific points in this amendment, to say how the amendment actually roots the motion in what's already been taken place, what's ongoing, and it provides a path to pull all of that together for consideration. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Loudon. We now hear from Councillor Driver. Councillor Driver, can you just confirm beforehand that your amendment is seconded by Councillor Brown, and also that you've shared the amendment with Susan?
Yeah, thank you, Provost. Yeah, I've put forward up. Really, I'm just hoping that Martin accepts a couple of sentences to be added to this motion, but it's been seconded by Councillor Brown, and Susan does have it, and we'll share it in the chat or by email.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we welcome what Martin has said here, and I totally agree that it shouldn't be watered down at all. I would just like a couple of extra sentences put in there. I don't think any study is going to be complete without examining how the availability and the use of electric bikes could be expanded. So, it's just a couple of sentences. We have referred to the electric bikes, Camglen Bike Town, South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, and we want to examine how the availability and the use of electric bikes might be significantly expanded. My ward proves very difficult for cycling. Okay, there's poorly signposted cycle routes shared with walkers, and it causes much consternation. And if you're walking along and a bike passes you, it's daunting for many. My dog used to want to chase people on a bike a lot, so we took his bike away from him. But in all seriousness, my ward is in the hilliest area of East Kilbride. So at an altitude of 700 feet, if I cycle to the village, you're down to about 500 foot there, and then down to Hamilton, you're down to about 236. And whilst that makes a great journey there, I'm only getting home if someone can take pity on me and give me a lift. So the key benefit of all electric bikes is the extra power available to you through the motor, making it easier to conquer the hills. And I would suggest that this really needs to be a consideration throughout the whole of South Lanarkshire, and I just would like to see it specified in the motion itself. Even cycling just even around East Kilbride itself is an issue. The hills, okay, with the lack of a joined up cycling infrastructure is prohibitive, and I realise there's still work to be done with regards to the cycling infrastructure in order for residents to cycle to work, education or leisure. I think it's imperative that any study should examine how availability and the use of electric bikes might be significantly expanded. Many areas in South Lanarkshire are extremely hilly, and I would just ask Martin if he would accept additional sentences from the Lib Dems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now hear from Councillor Peter Craig. Beforehand, can you just confirm that you're seconding Councillor Loudon's amendment?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. As far as Martin's motion goes, as someone who's deeply involved in active travel, I welcome the discussion. I am a bit disappointed though, because within the cycling partnership, there's already been a presentation on this exact item, and I just wonder if you'd taken the time to actually go and ask about this to someone like Stuart Laird, who would have all this and would be able to give him all that information. Now that was 2 years ago that was presented, so I'm always up for these discussions, and I always welcome them. But I just feel that this is not the way to do it. If Martin wanted a paper to be brought to any committee, and I would suggest that the committee that would be the best would be the environmental one. All he has to do is ask, and most of the information is already there. And Fiona's idea of electric bikes, bringing electric bikes in as well, yeah, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But the actual discussion itself, the work that the cycling partnership does, and it's great work. A lot of people give their time to help guide and steer cycling within South Lanarkshire. And that work's kind of been ignored by putting this motion in the way that he has. So I would ask him to consider our amendment. I don't have a problem with the Liberal amendment going in as well, because all these things should be discussed. But I really feel a bit disappointed that he hasn't taken the time to present this paper in the way he should, in which case he would just have to go to the Environmental Committee and ask for a paper to be brought forward. So yes, I welcome it. I welcome any discussion on active travel, but I would ask him to accept our amendment along with the Liberals.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Councillor Brown. Beforehand, can you confirm that you are seconding Councillor Driver's amendment?
Yes, I can, Provost. Thank you very much. Pleasure in seconding Councillor Driver's motion and amendment and indeed comments. Could I say, if I may, that I think the amendment stands regardless of which of the motion or amendment is taken, and hopefully if Martin will accept that at the end of the day, that'll be fairly straightforward. There's a particular thing that's been put forward there. Fiona's right, she's discussed, I think, the ins and outs of the hilly nature thing, particularly for some of those who are getting a little bit older in years, dare I say it. Going downhill from my house is quite a reasonable proposition. Coming back up again is not quite so good in a cycling context and things of that kind. I think other councillors will be in something of the same position as many members of the public will be as well. But I say, though, in general terms, that the core thing here is modal shift. To get more people to consider making use of cycling, both for leisure and for commuting and for other purposes as part of their routines. And modal shift, I think, requires really, as Katie Lowden, I think, in a very excellent speech said, to take account of a whole range of things: the infrastructure, the availability of bikes, maps, perhaps, the community links and things like that as well, and obviously the electric bikes we've been talking about as well. There won't be one solution fits all situation, but I think if we can get these bits and pieces working together, as we increasingly are, then that will be actually very much germane to taking the matter forward. Somebody said, I think it might have even been the leader of the previous leaders' meeting, that part of the trouble is people are terrified to go on the roads in terms of bikes. And that's, if anything, is one of the biggest handicaps towards an expansion of cycling. So the more we can get into the scene of having segregated cycle tracks and things of that kind, the better. The more we can overcome the problems of hills, the better. The more there's information about these things and signposting, the better as well. This is an important debate. I'm very grateful to Martin for bringing it forward. I think he's done us a public service in that regard. I do think there's a wider context to the one he suggests, mind you, and whilst I'm not that bothered between the motion and the principal amendment as such, I do think actually, regardless of which one goes forward, we will have to look at the whole range of issues that are going to take forward the ability to produce and to support cycling in South Lanarkshire. So with these comments, I support the amendment and the general thrust of both the motion and the SNP amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Ross, followed by Councillor Halford, please.
Thank you very much, Provost. I decided probably it would be best to come in as people were mentioning old people, and then Robert made a direct correlation to a conversation we had the other day. So I suppose I should have come in at that point. Most people in the council know that I do have an electric bike. I try to use it as the electric motor as little as possible, but I'm on that bike almost every day. I use it to get to the council when possible, and it's great. But as Robert said, at the end of the day, the main obstruction to people using bikes is the fact that they're petrified on the roads because there's no segregated bicycle lanes. And until such times, even if we put in a scheme where we talk about joining up with other authorities, as long as we don't have that separate bicycle lane, then people will not be attracted to go on the road. I mean, we have a bike scheme within the council where you can get a loan of an electric bike to see how you would like it. You can get pay up the bikes through your wages. That's increased to take in the cost of electric bikes now. You can go on the Energy Trust and get an electric bike over a 4-year interest-free loan. there's plenty of ways that you can actually do this now, but the main fact remains, unless we have people that are comfortable and they look at the aspect of safety, we're not going to get the take up on cycles that we really need. So I would push, I have nothing against the combination of all these 3 amendments, and that we can really have a good look at this. But at the end of the day, we really need to take cycle infrastructure as one of the main facts. Thank you, Provost.
Halford.
Thank you, Provost. I'm going to shock a few people here, Martin included, because actually I'm very much in favour of what he's saying here. Most of you will probably be completely unaware, because you'll only have ever known me as somebody who can't walk, let alone cycle. But I actually, before I was disabled, I was a very, very keen cyclist and still own 2 very nice bicycles, which I can't bring myself to get rid of. But I don't want this to become a Hollywood party political broadcast. But one of the things that I've put forward as an improvement for South Lanarkshire is an integrated transport strategy, and part of that integrated transport strategy involves having cycle routes built into that transport, particularly for that last mile or the last 3 miles or whatever of anybody's journey. So I'm very keen. I'm a little bit lost in the way of how many amendments we've got and where we're going with all of this. But the prospect, if it was practical, and I pass no judgment on whether it is practical or not, to bring Boris bikes to Edinburgh, to South Lanarkshire, to South Lanarkshire would be a good thing. But certainly to review the integration of cycles into our transport structure, to bring things like segregated cycle routes so that cars and bicycles are not competing for the same tarmac, and that's particularly important, I think, for children. It's bad enough for adults, but if you're a small child, you really don't want to be on the same road as cars. But that is, as Robert said, a modal change which needs to be brought, and I think that this could be a step towards that. So I appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Halford. We hear from Councillor Loudon next. I take it, Councillor Dryden and Councillor Brown, your hands are still up. Do you want to take them down? Thank you so much. Councillor Loudon.
Thank you, Provost. Hopefully this might simplify it a wee bit. Then Councillor Halford, I've read over Councillor Dryborough's amendment. I'm happy to accept that into ours as well, so add that on to an addition before our last paragraph, if that makes sense to, as Councillor Craig and Councillor Ross had indicated. I think that's a really important addition as well to put in the part about electric bikes. So I'm happy to accept that, because I think actually what it's doing, it's coming from a very similar place to what I was speaking about earlier. It's about thinking about South Lanarkshire as a whole, and it's thinking about all of the local variables. One of the things which we haven't really touched on, and again, it's not something I wanted to go into in great detail, because I think either way there seems to be support for the general idea of looking into the feasibility of this across the chamber, virtual chamber today, which is great. But I think we need to go into more detail when we consider it. We look at what that might mean for different areas in South Lanarkshire. We haven't touched on the feasibility of expanding such a scheme into other areas apart from the Camglen area. The Camglen area makes most sense because of where the cycle routes are and the proximity to Glasgow and so on. I would like a bit more discussion about what would happen in the other areas. So that's why I think it's important to have that amendment in, which talks about community consultation, so that we make sure we're bringing people along with us and we're really finding out what it is people need and what people would want and what people would need for their specific area as well. Thanks, Provost, that's all.
Thank you very much. I'll now ask, before we go to the vote, and ask Susan to summarise where we are. Can I ask Councillor Lennon whether he's willing to accept any of the amendments thus far?
Yeah, Provost, I was hoping I could just sum up a little bit as well, if you'll indulge me. Yeah, I'm happy to accept Councillor Dryborough's amendment. I think that's very fair. I don't think I can accept Councillor Loudon's. Again, I think it comes from a good place, and I don't particularly disagree with anything that she's said, but I do think that kind of widening it out to include other things, well, that's completely valid. I'm quite keen that we have specifically a report or a feasibility study or an updated one into the specific proposal of a bike share scheme. I absolutely don't think that it should be a case of we get one report and then it's a one and done. It just gets rolled out. There's no further consultation, and I certainly don't intend this proposal to be in any way minimising the work of other organisations, Camglen, Bike Town, of which I'm a semi-regular customer. Absolutely, yeah, I think they do fantastic work, but I think that the way that the kind of discussion has evolved over the course of this motion kind of illustrates what I was a wee bit worried about in terms of widening it out. Yeah, having viaducts that connect various different parts of South Lanarkshire to maybe different parts of Glasgow, or maybe having segregated cycle lanes or any of these other things. Completely in favour of all of them. I've never met a cycling infrastructure project that I didn't like, but I think that there's a particular value to having a bike share scheme. I think that that's something that is worthy of particular attention, and that's why this is like a very particular motion following or seeking to kind of raise that issue and seeing what the options specifically on that are. So I'm happy to accept Councillor Dryborough's amendment, but unfortunately I don't think I can accept Councillor Loudon's.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lennon. Before we move to Susan, the Chief Executive wants to have a quick word.
Well, it's a very unusual situation, Provost, because Councillor Dryborough has managed a sale on both the motion and the amendment from Councillor Loudon. So effectively, given that both parties have agreed to accept Councillor Dryborough's insertion, that would then go into the motion, but it would also go into the amendment. So just as you're going to kick over to Susan, it was just regarding the process and the vote, it was just to be clear with all members that Councillor Dryborough's insertion is going to go in on both the motion and the amendment, and therefore will be part of whatever decision Council reaches.
Thank you. Susan, can I pass to you now for a summary and for a vote, please?
Susan, you're muted, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say that Councillor Dryborough's addendum was input to the chat, so hopefully everyone has had sight of that. And as outlined by Cleland, it is the motion as detailed in page 35 of your papers by Councillor Lennon, seconded by Councillor Fagan, with the addition of the addendum by Councillor Dryborough. And the amendment is as circulated by email from Councillor Loudon and Councillor Craig, and again it also includes the wording of that addendum. So I'll now move to the vote and read out your name if you can indicate whether you would wish to vote for the motion or the amendment. Councillor Allison.
Sorry, I wasn't ready.
That's all right. I was just checking if you were there.
Sorry, you've confused me now. Which one is the...
Sorry, I'll just repeat that. The motion is as detailed in page 35 of your papers, with the inclusion of the wording from Councillor Dryborough, and the amendment was previously emailed to you, and it also includes the wording from Councillor Dryborough.
Thank you. Amendment.
Okay. Amendment. Okay, thank you, Councillor Allison. Councillor Anderson.
Amendment.
Councillor Bradley.
Amendment.
Councillor Brogan.
Motion.
Councillor Brown.
Motion.
Councillor Buchanan.
Amendment.
Councillor Burns. I don't see Councillor Burns in the meeting, so I don't think he's with us. Councillor Callaghes.
Amendment, sorry.
Councillor Callaghan.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Campbell,
Amendment.
Councillor Carmichael,
Motion.
Councillor Chalmers,
Amendment.
Councillor Convery,
Motion.
Councillor Cooper,
Motion.
Councillor Corbett,
Amendment.
Councillor Cowie,
Motion.
Councillor Craig,
Amendment.
Councillor Devlin,
Motion.
Councillor Donnelly,
Amendment.
Councillor Dorman,
Amendment.
Councillor Dryborough,
Motion.
Councillor Fagan,
Motion.
Councillor Faulkner,
Motion.
Councillor Ferguson,
Amendment.
Councillor Fulton,
Amendment.
Councillor Gray,
Amendment.
Councillor Greenshields,
Motion.
Councillor Hamilton,
Motion.
Councillor Harrow,
Motion.
Councillor Halford,
Amendment.
Councillor Horn,
Amendment.
Councillor Horsham,
Amendment.
Councillor Hose,
Amendment.
Councillor LeBlond,
Amendment.
Councillor Lennon,
Motion.
Councillor Lockhart,
Amendment.
Councillor Logan,
Motion.
Councillor Loudon,
Amendment.
Councillor Lowe. I'm just going to check whether Councillor Lowe's still with us. Councillor Lowe, I think you're perhaps in mute.
Yes, I'm still with you, dear.
Okay,
A motion.
you're voting for the motion, thank you. Councillor MacDonald,
Okay.
Amendment.
Councillor Marsh,
Amendment.
Councillor McAdams,
Motion.
Provost,
Amendment.
Councillor McClymont,
Motion.
Councillor McCreary,
Amendment.
Councillor McGavigan,
Amendment.
Councillor McGeever,
Motion.
Councillor McGuigan,
Amendment.
Councillor McLaughlin,
Motion.
Councillor Miller,
Amendment.
Councillor Nayland,
Amendment.
Councillor Nelson,
Amendment.
Councillor Nugent,
Amendment.
Councillor Razak,
Motion.
Councillor Ross,
Amendment.
Councillor Scott,
Motion.
Councillor Shearer,
Amendment.
Councillor Stevenson,
Amendment.
Councillor Walker,
Motion.
Councillor Wardhaw,
Motion.
Councillor Wark,
Amendment.
Councillor Watson,
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Amendment.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. 25.
We have 25 votes for the motion and 37 for the amendment. The amendment is therefore carried.
Thank you very much, Susan. I have no items of urgent business, and I close the meeting and just say, stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Provost.
Thank
Chair.
you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.